All right, welcome to the Otherppl Show. My name is Brad Listi, and this is my podcast. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media. I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram. So I'm going to be doing a Craftwork episode today, and I'm very excited to welcome Jane Friedman onto this program. You might know Jane Friedman. She has been a mainstay in the literary community for a long time, and the second edition of her book entitled The Business of Being a Writer is now available from the University of Chicago Press. And we're going to be talking today about how to make a living as a writer. It's a fundamental question, and I cannot think of a better person with whom to speak on this matter than Jane Friedman, who has spent her career covering the business of publishing and helping writers understand it a little better. So, a Craftwork conversation about how to make a living as a writer with Jane Friedman is coming up momentarily. Today's episode is brought to you by Mary Sue Rucci Books, publisher of the debut novel Tilt by Emma Pattee. I've been talking about this book all month. It is the April selection for the Otherppl Book Club. That is my book club, and you should sign up for my book club. You can do that over at the show's official website, otherppl.com, for just $9.99 a month. You get a new book delivered to your door. I interview book club authors on this program, so you can listen and then read, or read and then listen. It makes for an enriching and holistic literary experience. And Tilt is a riveting debut, one of the most celebrated debut novels of the year. It's about a woman who is 37 weeks pregnant and is caught in the aftermath of a massive earthquake in the Pacific Northwest. This is a page-turner. I couldn't put it down. Again, it is called Tilt by Emma Pattee. I spoke with Emma on this program just a couple of weeks ago. Incidentally, Emma was 37 weeks pregnant during the conversation and actually gave birth on the show. So check it out. I forget what number episode it is. Episode 961. Maybe that's it. My conversation with Emma Pattee. And be sure to read her debut novel, Tilt, available now from Mary Sue Rucci Books. So before we get going, I want to give a quick plug to my new company. It is called Deep Dive, and it is going to be launching later this year. Deep Dive specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio, and the debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I am the host of the course, and there's really never been an audio course about writing quite like this one. It's going to be more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of leading writers like Emily St. John Mandel, Lynn Steger-Strong, Poor, who else? Tiffany Clark Harrison, Matt Bell, Matthew Salasis, Steve Almond. I mean, there's a lot, and it's very exciting, and it's coming together as we speak, and it is going to be available later this year. Check out Deep Dive on the internet, www.deepdive.audio. Sign up for the Deep Dive newsletter, and you can follow Deep Dive on Instagram and Blue Sky. Today's episode is also brought to you by Zona Motel, an exciting new literary magazine from Julieta Scoria and Lucy K. Shaw and Misha Marin, and a host of contributors. Zona Motel is the kind of literary publication that we need right now. It is algorithm-free. It operates on the periphery. It covers independent presses. It features recaps of literary events and some literary gossip and some thoughtful essays, all of the above. Check it out over on Substack. The address is zonamotel.substack.com, Z-O-N-A motel.substack.com. Okay, so my guest today is Jane Friedman. Her book, The Business of Being a Writer, is available in a second edition from the University of Chicago Press, and we had an excellent Craftwork conversation about how to make a living as a writer. Is it possible? Can this be done? You're about to find out. Jane Friedman is widely known in the creative writing community for her website and blog, which you can find over at janefriedman.com. She is the co-founder and editor of the Bottom Line newsletter. She also does another newsletter called Electric Speed, and she has spent more than 25 years working in the publishing industry with a focus on author education and trend reporting. She has appeared in a variety of media outlets, including the New York Times, The Today Show, CNN, Wired, The Guardian, and The Washington Post, among other places. And I could not be more delighted to welcome Jane Friedman onto this show for the first time. So let's get to the conversation. We are going to be talking about how to make a living as a writer. Here I am with Jane Friedman.
I dug into this question years ago. I did a keynote for the Muse in the Marketplace, this annual conference that Grub Street in Boston hosts. And my marching orders were to look at author incomes and how they've been declining. The presumption being that they are declining or have been. And I went back to what I would consider some pretty in-depth, serious histories of authorship. And what I found is exactly what you said, that it's never been straightforward or easy, that on some level writers have always struggled. There are certainly times when, as you point out, you could get paid a significant amount for a certain type of writing, and those times tend to coincide with industries when they were flush with cash. So, for example, the magazine publishing industry and newspapers, they had this golden age where literacy was exploding. There was more leisure time. There was a middle class that was reading avidly. And this was, before TV, and to some extent before radio too, when newspapers and magazines were the dominant media. And so you could, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, sell a short story to the Saturday Evening Post and get paid a significant sum. But obviously we live in a very different world now. There was actually just an article published recently in the Yale Review by someone who wrote frequently for Vanity Fair and got 6 figures per article. And of course, those days are now gone too. But, if you look at the 80s, that was a time when for magazines, they were just swimming in advertising money. And today, people argue that the rates today haven't changed for magazines in 20, 30 years. And that's true. They just don't have the money to pay. It's not that they're money grubbing. It's not that, they've brought down the hammer on writers. It's that the money went elsewhere. Lots of reasons for that. They're complicated. What I try to tell writers, especially those who are interested in the book publishing side, is that book sales are probably never what you think they're going to be. Even if you get a significant advance, most advances don't earn out. So that might be all the money that you see. And you have to think about another way to earn a living as a writer. If that's what you want, that doesn't depend on book sales, at least early on in your career. So for most writers, it's going to take building up a body of work before they're going to see a living wage from it. So ultimately you need a backlist, just like publishers to stay solvent, to continue publishing new work, need a backlist to help mitigate the risk of investing in new work.
Who was this writer for Vanity Fair who was making 6 figures per article?
I didn't recognize the name, so it hasn't stuck with me. But, if you go and look at the Yale Review 6-figure writer, it will come right up. Wow.
Can you imagine writing an article for 6 figures? That seems like it doesn't. It seems like not real. I guess it isn't anymore.
It's not. I don't think he's certainly an outlier. I don't think every writer was getting those sorts of figures. But it was a time when you could make a living as a freelance writer for magazines. And about the time I came into the industry, this is in the late 90s, there were still lots of articles and books and prescriptive information about how to break into magazine writing and publishing. And, that's not really realistic any longer. So that again, that time has ended.
Everything seems really fluid. It's always been fluid. It's just like the nature of things, but it feels especially so right now with like how fast technological change is happening, how quickly like the markets change and how much they fluctuate. It feels like the goalposts are always moving, or it can feel that way. And it seems like there is a 99% and 1% framework, like across the entire economy. But I think in the creative arts, it seems especially so. If like you're in the 1%, you're loving it.
Right.
If you're in the 99%, you're struggling, right?
So this applies, I think, to anyone who's trying to lead a creative life, who's trying to produce art. So it's not just books and writing, it's music, it's film, it's fine art or the visual arts, and so on. And I think it's always been true throughout history that, well, first of all, there's no formula. Like, it's not like becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer where you have some sort of guarantee that if you go through these certain steps at the end of it, there's going to be some sort of paying, reliable career at the end. So artists, writers, and all creative folks are going through this, what I call the trough of despair, where you don't know if you're going to get discovered, if you're going to make it, if you're going to hit that sweet spot of timing and your own creative or professional development at the right opportunity. So there's this serendipity to it. And even though I tend to be a little bit more optimistic than pessimistic about where we are right now, there's no question that even if you struggle and put in the hours and hone your craft, you can still end up not achieving your goals. To me, it's not about just hard work for the sake of hard work and eventually success. There are other factors that enter into it, and you don't have control over much of it. So usually when I'm talking to writers in particular, I try to emphasize, especially if they're trying to make money, not to invest everything into just this one project or this one book being the thing that does it for you, or imagining that there's going to be some overnight success where someone is going to discover you and then you're going to be all set. That doesn't happen for many people. And those that are consistent, I think consistency is a big deal, and they're showing up regularly, mainly doing the work, but also trying to be visible, are usually the ones that make it, whatever it means to that person. And there are lots of ways to make it. There was a really interesting statistic. This came from a website called Fiction Database. I might reference it in my book, that it's something like 80% of writers, after they do their first few books, they stop. It's a really small percentage that actually keep publishing year after year after year, or decade after decade. And I think that part of it is that I think when you look at the writing life, or you look at the authors you admire, there is kind of this romantic idea about what that could be. And there's a lot of desire for, the cachet and the culture around writing and publishing. But writing is hard work. I myself really don't enjoy writing books. I like writing, but not writing books. Writing books is really challenging work to do well. And I think that you do it a few times and the romance starts to fade, especially if you're working with publishers who can be very disappointing in how they support you or don't support you. And so you get a few books in and you're like, do I really want to do this? Is it really worth it? I might not be making any money at it. Do I have other priorities? And so typically writers need to have this internal motivation, this internal drive to keep doing it because they're just fascinated by the process or by the work. I'm not going to say that business or marketing acumen doesn't come into it. It does. And that's why I focus on helping writers with that. But you have to really be invested in the work itself in order to keep doing it for as long as it requires for that success to appear.
Yeah, it's enormous labor. writing a book, and to do book after book with no remuneration.
Right.
That's a lot to ask of anybody.
It is. I would say that it's a really tough love perspective to take, I suppose, but no one is entitled to a living from writing books. So you have to think about what compromises you're willing to make. And I would say that most writers are supplementing their income from book sales or from book advances with something else. Teaching has long been one of those things. Adjacent services or activities like editing. Some people come from wealth and privilege, as it was many, many years ago. Also, there used to be this aspect of patronage that supported writers when there wasn't really a commercial market to speak of for books like there is today. We're actually coming full circle to that. And now writers are looking again at patronage as a way to support their work, going directly to readers. So something I try to encourage writers to think about is don't be stuck on looking to the publishers or to these traditional avenues to support your career. Maybe they will and maybe they won't. And it tends to change throughout a career anyway. But look at the multifaceted ways that you can get the support you need. For some writers, maybe it's just better to have a day job, whatever that day job is. Some can look direct to reader. Some can look for institutional support. Some can teach and so on. So I think everyone figures out the business model that's going to support the work that they want to do.
Almost every writer I know is juggling multiple things.
Yeah.
There are very, very few, vanishingly few writers who have a situation that allows them to simply write fiction.
Yeah.
And especially like earn a living from it. I think there are, like, of the people I know who just write, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're supporting themselves with their writing. They might have a spouse.
Yes.
Or, like you say, like a family wealth or something that's subsidizing them.
Right. Exactly. I should say that, in the last 10 to 15 years, there has been an enormous shift in how authors make the market work for them, let's say. And it's in a very specific area. It's in mass market fiction. So with the advent of self-publishing and ebooks and this direct-to-reader channel that really wasn't available to authors before because you needed a publisher, you needed to get retailers to agree to take the book. Now anyone can, of course, upload their work directly to Amazon or Ingram and other places for sale in print, ebook, audio. I'm not saying that the fact that you can do it so quickly is like this has been great for publishing because we now have more than 2 million books published every year because it is in fact so easy and it creates a lot of noise in the marketplace. But the fact that authors don't have to get a publisher on board with their work has really changed how some writers are able to make their living. So especially if you look at romance, romantasy, which is popular at the moment, science fiction and fantasy, mystery, thriller, suspense, the really commercial genres. You'll find that authors are now making really good livings, often under the radar of mainstream media, even some publishers, making really good livings just publishing book after book after book in their little subcategory or niche that they've really mastered. They've mastered how to package it and position it. They've mastered how to satisfy the reader's needs. And those people can make 6 figures a year because they don't have anyone taking a cut of the action other than the retailer. There's no publisher taking a cut of that unless they decide to partner later on with a publisher. So even the publishers themselves, it was the CEO of Simon & Schuster, Jonathan Karp, said within the last year, mass market fiction is different now. He essentially said self-publishing authors, that's their market. And, we look forward to partnering with them so that, we stay in the game in those spaces. And if you look at some of the big success stories in the last year, they're from self-published authors partnering with traditional publishers and keeping their rights. But, I have to fully admit, this is a very particular type of work, a particular type of author, someone who, they listen to readers and to some extent they're writing for the market. And if you're on the more literary end of the spectrum, if you're someone who comes from an MFA program, it's probably not how you're thinking about your work, and you're probably not writing in a series, and you're probably not producing more than one book a year.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of it's like the Wild West when it comes to that mass market stuff. And it's interesting to me thinking about how traditional publishers relate to that market trend and how they keep up or don't keep up with what's actually happening. I think it's fascinating to think of an author who might be selling tens of thousands of copies of their work on their own with no help at all. Just putting the book directly into the marketplace and somehow building a readership based on, I guess, word of mouth. I don't know exactly how it happens, but I'm thinking of an interview that I did a few years ago. And this was not a mass market author, but it was an author who had self-published. And I don't typically talk to self-published writers just because I have to have there has to be like a benchmark, I guess. I wouldn't know how to parse it all, but this book was interesting to me. It was by Sam Talent. He's a comedian, and he wrote a novel called Running the Light. Mm. And it's just fabulous. Like I read it and I was like bowled over. It's like I cannot imagine that there's a better work of literary fiction about the life of a comedian than this book. And he was just like, yeah, I couldn't get any traction. So I just started selling it. Long story short, he had sold like 25,000 copies of this book out of his garage. Wow. And interestingly, I think just last year, he ended up getting a 2-book deal from a big publisher. So they're going to reissue Running the Light and will presumably market it and put some money into it. But that's just one example. It doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen where somebody's sort of operating independently outside of the traditional structures and finding success. So anyway, I guess like all that we're talking about sort of underscores the fact that there are so many options available to people these days in terms of being proactive, self-directed, kind of running your own show, building your own business. And typically it requires like a multi-faceted approach. So yes, you're writing your books, but you're also keeping a Substack newsletter, and maybe you have a podcast, and maybe you're publishing short fiction, on websites that don't really pay, but they get your name out there. And what am I missing? You have a YouTube channel, you're on social media, talking to your phone and like TikTok. Charming the yeah. I mean, yeah, TikTok, you're doing like dances on TikTok. Like, I think that like, that's nice. I like the idea that people have options, and I like the idea that you can kind of make of yourself what you will. You know what I'm saying? I like that people's ingenuity and pluck and hard work can help them to build something for themselves that's valuable. That said, as somebody who's kind of doing some version of this myself, it's exhausting. I find myself oftentimes like bristling, like, oh my God, now I've got to master TikTok too. And I've got to talk to my phone, and it's just so much. And there's never money. It's always like the promise of money. Like, well, if you get enough influence and you have enough reach with your videos, then you can get sponsorships. And there's always these people who are making like $750,000 a month by like selling shampoo on their TikTok or whatever. But it just seems like that's the carrot, and it's dangling out there, but it's really hard to reach. Like, do I have a bad attitude? Can you talk me down off the ledge, or is it appropriate for me to be on the ledge?
I think the bad attitude is appropriate. And certainly I hear far more frustration as well as anxiety from writers, especially in the last 5 years or so. I think part of it has to do with how the online landscape has fragmented to some extent. And so it creates too much choice, too many places where you hear maybe you ought to be active, which means more things to maintain or produce content for. And there's also something in traditional book publishing that's a little bit broken in how they market and promote books, how they reach readers or don't reach readers. The traditional publisher's strength once upon a time was in being able to merchandise, market, and promote to tastemakers, to people who write reviews, to other gatekeepers, essentially, whether that's retailers, booksellers, reviewers, etc. And now that playbook doesn't work so well anymore. It works for some books, but certainly not, in my opinion, the majority of books. So you've got publishers kind of flailing about when they are trying to make an effort. They're trying to boost their direct-to-reader strength. Some are better than others. But it's really hard when you're a Penguin Random House and you've got a couple thousand titles, and each of them has a very distinctive audience. So there's a lot of leaning on the author to, do something about this.
Yeah. I mean, you spent all these years writing this book. Can you also be the marketing director and your own publicist? We don't, that's kind of how it feels as a writer, where it's like all of the responsibility is sort of incumbent upon you. Right. And that can be some writers have the gift, right? They're very good at that sort of thing. A lot of writers have no clue.
Right. And I have a lot of empathy for this. I understand it. I write and publish myself. I happen to be better at the business side than most, but I feel the pressures too. I can't tell you how often people have told me I should start a podcast. And I'm like, I don't want a podcast.
I've already got enough going on.
I'm absolutely delighted to appear on them. I don't want to manage one. I don't want to be on TikTok. I really, frankly, don't like seeing my face on video. I don't want to do the dances and the singing. I don't want to be an influencer, etc. So I have all those same reactions and emotions. I am able, though, I think, to change the framework in a way that's helpful for me and that maybe is helpful for other writers, which is if you can find the one or two things you want to do, and I really do mean want, that's sustainable, that appeals to your own interests and strengths, and you're able to do that, again, consistently. Consistency is a big thing with me. What you're going to do is grow a base, we could call it platform if you like, that of readers, of people who are interested in your work, maybe some of these influential people, so that when something happens next for you, whether that's a next book or a next project that you're promoting, that you're not having to depend on someone else to spread the word for you. So I'm looking for authors to be less dependent on the publisher or the agent or the whomever to do whatever it is they want them to do. That you have some agency and you're able to do some things that give you reach over time. So, classically, like if I go back to things I was saying in 2010, at that time I was telling people, you should really think about the email newsletter. I'm not going to say I was before my time because I think email has always been powerful. It's just been it's been overlooked and understudied generally, I think, in publishing up until around the time Substack exploded, maybe a little bit before that. Because there are examples of publishers who saw the writing on the wall very early, like Open Road Media might be one example.
Which was also founded by a woman named Jane Friedman, right?
That's right. The other Jane Friedman.
That's right.
So there are some publishers who understand the power of direct to consumer, which is, basically what we're talking about here, being able to reach the people who are going to buy the book, not relying on Amazon to do it or ads to do it or booksellers to do it, but being able to reach them directly. So for all this time, I've been advocating for the email newsletter. I think we're now starting to tip in the other direction where we've got over enthusiasm or over adoption when it's not going to be right for every use case. But it's really powerful. But it's not the only tool, right? So I think about all of these things as tools. They're just means to be visible. And I really strongly believe that writers get to choose the tools that suit them best, that they think align with their values, and then ignore everything else that's going on. I'm not saying stick your head in the sand. I think it's good to be aware of of any changes in the market, trends, things that can affect your own success. But you don't have to be on TikTok just because that's the thing everyone's talking about right now that's moving fiction sales. Just because you start a TikTok account and do the things that people say you ought to do doesn't mean it's going to move a single copy. A lot of the copies that are getting moved there are by people who are part of a particular community that reads and recommends books. And unless you really want to play that game, it's not something I advocate authors go and do. So I encourage writers and everyone to think about, where is the pressure coming from? What are the messages you're listening to that say you have to do this, you have to do that, or these are the tools, or this is the new way, or you must. All of these shoulds and musts. It creates so much, I think, anxiety. It doesn't allow you to think more strategically about, okay, let's look at what this has to offer. Does it fit with what I'm doing? Am I curious about it? And do I think I'm going to reach people I care about using this tool? So I do feel like, to me, these are all part of the business questions I encourage people to ask. I think some of these questions are about creativity and imagination. I think that to be a good business person, you, in fact, do need to be creative and imaginative and think about how these things fit together. So I do feel like you can make things align. Now, this is not to say that there aren't some really disingenuous messages being sent by big tech companies or by people who are promoting these tools. I'm not saying that these are necessarily good actors. Sometimes they're very bad actors. But I try not to let the systems defeat me. I look at how I can use the systems for my own purposes.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you're a writer out there and you're trying to formulate a plan for yourself, like outside of the context of writing your books, you don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to do everything. You can take a look at the playing field. You can choose the things that feel like the best fit for you. Yeah. It can be one or two, and just stick with that.
Absolutely.
Is there ever, and I guess you also have to have your antenna up a little bit because things shift so fast, and there can be, like, there is the issue of like things going extinct. Like, I'm old enough to remember when MySpace was cool.
I'm not old.
Like, if I were still on MySpace, that would be a little sad. I don't even think it exists anymore. But there are shifts that happen, out there in the creator universe that you do have to sort of pay attention to, and it's probably going to be pretty obvious when it's time to move or when it's time to try something else. I
agree. So, Twitter was a big thing for my career. So this is going back to 2009, 2010. The reason that there are two Jane Friedmans in publishing is partly because I got on Twitter really early because I was curious about it. I got kind of obsessed with it for a little while. Not that I was spending a lot of time posting, but I was analyzing what other people were posting. And so I would do these weekly roundups of like, here's all the great stuff I found on Twitter. Go look at it. And it just created this really interesting cycle of people seeing me because I was recommending them and then following me on Twitter. And then I would write about it, at my site or on my blog. And then I would talk about it at events. And it just created this reinforcing cycle of getting more followers until I had more followers than I really deserved in some regard, because Twitter.
How many did you have?
220,000, I think. I think that's right. Yeah. And that was by, 2015, maybe a little somewhere in that ballpark. I think that's when I maxed out. But Twitter, because I was one of these early adopters, they put me on the recommended list for books. That's why it grew so fast. But I triggered that with my own activity. So in any event, all that to say, Twitter made me visible, and I sit in Cincinnati, so I'm not exactly in the inside circles of New York publishing. I certainly know people who work in New York publishing, and I go to New York frequently, but I wasn't necessarily known in New York publishing in 2010, sitting in Cincinnati. But Twitter made me visible to those people, and they started following what I had to say. And there was this feeling of, if you have something interesting to say, you can pop in these places. Like, it did feel like a meritocracy of a kind. And it didn't matter that I was in the Midwest. And so I ended up getting all sorts of interesting opportunities and jobs. I was invited to a National Endowment of the Arts grant panel. I'm not saying this was like, I didn't have any substance behind me. Like, it was just my Twitter following that made me desirable, but that's what made me visible. And so fast forward to when Twitter becomes X, it has new ownership, and I leave. And this is, I think one of the dramatic downsides to living these online lives or having these personas or things that you're developing. And sometimes you're going to have to walk away or rebuild. But fortunately, because I do that was just an outpost for me. It wasn't the center of my life. So if I had to say that there is a center to my business life, it's my website. It's the content that's on my website. It's the content that goes out through my email, much of which appears on my website. And so when I did, step off the Twitter stage, I still had the value that I had captured from all of those years of activity. And I think that's true of many outposts that you might use, whatever those are for you, that if you do leave it, hopefully you've been able to retain the value in some other way.
Well, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind, one of which is that it's good to do multiple things. Don't put all your eggs in one internet basket, because when Twitter gets bought by a Nazi, it's like, suddenly everything's upended. And then the other thing I think you're saying, which makes a lot of sense, is that whatever your primary thing is, it's good that you would have control over it. Like your website, your blog, your newsletter, that's you.
Yeah.
And there's really no outside force that, there's no like shift in the business landscape that's going to upend a person's website, most likely. You're going to be able to keep that going. And that's kind of the centerpiece.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm certainly watching AI with some amount of concern, just as someone who has a website that generates a lot of search traffic. So a lot of new people find me because they type something into Google, like how to write a book proposal or how to query or something industry related. And so they end up at my site where I have an article, and then they end up on my newsletter list or whatever. So there's this sense now that because AI has ingested so much material, they've ingested my site, of course, that people will use AI tools to get information they need without ever having to visit a website or even know who the source is. This is all very much in flux, but it's on my mind. I don't have any answers, but I think people like me are really watching how their search traffic progresses as AI tools become more widely adopted.
Yeah, it feels like big shifts are happening. I got to say, I view it with a healthy amount of dread.
Yeah.
I don't see this ending well. I don't see this, like, based on the evidence that we have so far with the things that come out of Silicon Valley and the way that these forces come to bear. I just don't feel like there's going to be too much money to be made and too much control to be had. And, I guess that's a different conversation, but I don't know what to do about it. I'm like you, I'm watching this and I'm like, are there just going to be like AI podcasts? There's just going to be some like disembodied voice that's, brilliant. And it's just like rattling off what people want to hear. I have no idea, but I'm sure if somebody could figure that out and can figure out how to monetize it, it will be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about this old Kevin Kelly maxim. Kevin Kelly is the founder of Wired Magazine, right?
Yes.
And so he's like a Silicon Valley, like Buddha. He's kind of like this old, like grand figure in the tech world. And he has this theory that if you have 1,000 true fans, you can build a viable business. I have repeated that before once or twice, like it's something that's stuck in my head. Do you think that's true?
That it's something I've repeated too. I repeat it less often these days because the environment is so crowded. And I feel like it's maybe selling a dream that might not exist for a lot of people. I think the spirit of it is true. Whether it's 1,000 or 10,000, we can argue about. What I take from it is a little more complex, which is when you find a set of people, maybe it's 1,000, it could be 100, who are willing to pay pretty much any sum for this premium thing that you do, it probably means that there's a really significant number, say 10,000, 100,000, who are willing to buy something you do at a very low cost, maybe the cost of a book. And then there's like 100,000 people or maybe 1 million people who will sign up for whatever you do for free. So I think about the 1,000 true fans as the people on the really far side of the demand curve. So I think every writer can imagine this demand curve. And so the premium 1,000 fan people are going to pay the thousands of dollars to have dinner with you or go on some wine tasting in Tuscany, whatever. Go on that retreat, high-priced retreat. But, there's also going to be this really wide middle of people who want the books at various price points. And then, like I said, then the people who you're never going to get them up that demand curve, but they're part of your audience anyway. And you could even put people who will only check out your book from the library. Like they're never actively handing you money. So for publishing, and this is where we get into how do you earn a living from book sales question. Is that possible? I think when writers just focus on one part of the demand curve, like the sale of this particular book or this particular edition, it makes it really hard. But if you're able to look at what are all of the different points on that demand curve, if you're able to fully develop it from free to super expensive, you have a much better chance, I think, of piecing together the living. So in that sense, I think Kevin Kelly's maxim is true, because if you've got those 1,000 people, there's so many different points on the demand curve leading up to that point. And I think you can see this happening in some regard with the popularity right now of deluxe editions. So, for example, this is getting into the commercial fiction market, but the latest Rebecca Yarros book, the publisher Entangled sold more deluxe editions than standard editions. To me, that's just astonishing, because people want that limited thing that no one else is going to get. And you can see
what does it entail? What is a deluxe edition of it? It's because Rebecca Yarros is romantasy, right?
That's right. Yes. So I actually haven't seen a copy in a store. I don't read that series, but I think it means it's a hardcover with sprayed edges or some sort of decorative edging to it. Maybe there's a foil stamp, but that's the sort of thing you might expect. And authors all across the genres and spectrums, like self-publishing, traditional publishing, big publishers, small publishers, they're all really diving into the pool on this because it's like, oh, there's another point on the demand curve. That's how I see it. Like they've discovered there's a market for deluxe editions. And I mean, I don't know that there's probably going to be a point at which people get a little bit tired of this, and there is a trend aspect to this that will exhaust itself. But there's nothing new about having a deluxe edition. I just think people forgot that readers can really enjoy having those.
So when it comes to being somebody who does catch a wave and sell a ton of books and, build a career that allows them to just write for a living, nobody has that figured out. I've been talking to writers and people in publishing for, years and years. I've never gotten a satisfactory answer. I don't think anybody knows. If somebody knew, they'd be a cajillionaire. Agree? Like it just feels like kind of like winning the lottery. It feels kind of arbitrary. Yes, the quality of the book has to be in a certain spot, but there's also these like magical issues of timing and where the culture is at the moment the book drops, and
right.
Maybe some lucky coverage, in the press gets a lot of clicks. But there's no way to game it, is there?
No. I don't think you can engineer a bestseller despite people studying what goes into a bestseller. Like, isn't there a book? I think there's a nonfiction book on some data scientists who actually looked at what makes a bestseller, and they tried to reduce it to a formula. but even if you follow that, I don't think it matters, because as you said, there are a lot of magical pieces that go into this, and timing and what people are looking for at the moment. I mean, if there is a secret, it's what I expressed earlier, which is you have to keep playing another hand of poker in some regard. Like, you have to keep up the experiments or keep putting out new work and seeing, is this the one that's going to hit?
I've gotten so exasperated by trying to solve this riddle. Like, I look sometimes and I'm like, well, this author, like, their work's good. Like, nothing against it. It might not be exactly for me, but it's also not like Tolstoy. Mm-hmm. And yet everything they say on social media, like literally everything, like what they had for breakfast, and people are just giving a standing ovation. And so then I find myself just being like, I think it's just how they vibrate. I get very kind of like mystical about it. Like, they just have like a vibrational frequency that, for whatever reason, is like meeting people where they are. Like, mm-hmm. What is it about certain people whose online presentation in particular resonates, but also maybe they're literary. Like, it's just, for whatever reason, it works. It happens. Like, people like them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think some people are very comfortable online, or they've built this online persona that is very compelling, and I mean, I'm just looking like you from the outside looking in. I don't feel entirely comfortable online despite being on social media every day. But I think some people are able to figure out that expression that both is, I would say, authentic to them, and also makes people feel seen, like they've somehow tapped into some pop culture vein or zeitgeist. And I think they also feed off the energy that they get back in the responses or the replies. Someone who I think of when we talk about this is going back to maybe 2012, when I was on Twitter frequently. Roxane Gay, she would basically do stream of consciousness on Twitter. Like, she'd be live tweeting a TV show or a movie she's watching and giving us her play-by-play, like what's going through her head. And you feel like you're getting the world, her world, inner world is opened up to you on a minute-by-minute basis. And I thought, I could never do that. I cannot do what she's doing. I don't know if she still does it or not. But it was just kind of a force of nature. I felt like, and that's, I think, one of the reasons I tell people when they ask me, what should I do on social media, or which tools should I use, or whatever. And it's like, I can't tell you how to be yourself in these places. I can't tell you do what Roxane Gay does. She does what she does because she's Roxane Gay. So you have to figure out what your voice or perspective or your position is going to be in that particular place, and what purpose you think you're serving. But certainly once you reach a certain level of fame, in whatever community, people are interested in what you had for breakfast, or, whatever the minutia of your life is going to work out fine.
Yeah. I feel like I've cultivated a persona of someone who is just clueless and uncomfortable when it comes to how to be on the internet. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I just feel there's always a part of me that's like, what am I doing? Why am I posting this every time? Like, I always there's like a tweet one time, and this is how sad it is. I don't know if I tweeted it or somebody else did, but it was like, every time I tweet, like a little part of me dies. That's kind of how it feels to me emotionally. But along these lines of like building a business model for yourself and being industrious and being sort of multifaceted in your approach, unless I suppose you're in that like rare air of like the 1% of the 1%. I'm curious to know if in the course of your career and in your research, like of the marketplace, if you have a sense of how big the pie is for book nerds. Like, you talk about a noisy environment, right? Mm-hmm. That applies to the literary space, but it just applies to the world in general. Like, it's been very fascinating to me to watch over the course of this century how a lot of the pressures that literary people had been feeling for a long time started to creep over into like music and the movies. Like, there was a time, I think, where if you made a movie at a big studio, the amount of people who would see it was it would be a number that would be eye-popping for a literary author.
Yeah.
But now even like TV shows, like nobody, I mean, I guess a lot of people by comparison maybe watch, but less and less. It's hard for them too, I guess is the point. There's this fractalization of the entire media space because of the advancing technologies and the ways that I guess the barriers to entry have lowered. But when you look at book space, people who are really interested in books in whatever form and interested in writing, how many people is it? Like I sometimes sit around wondering, like how many people out there are the target market? And I guess it's a global question, but
so there's someone in the book industry that does consumer research, which, side note, this is actually really rare. Book publishing doesn't typically do consumer research. So like the people who actually buy the books, which is astonishing. That's probably another conversation. But so his name is Peter Hildick Smith. His company is called the Codex Group. You can sometimes find him quoted in New York Times articles, and he tends to do custom consumer research for big publishers. And I had a conversation with him a couple years ago where he with confidence, and I believe him, stated that 20% of the US population are what he calls avid book readers. So what's the population of the US now? It's 300 plus million. So 20% of that.
60 million.
60 million.
Let's just say.
But, he's not talking about people who just read, like, I don't know if by book nerd, you mean like maybe literary fiction, but he's talking about anyone who would buy anything from a romantasy book to, a poetry collection, everyone all in. Some people, when they hear that, they feel very depressed. But to me, I actually think I think that's a pretty good number, given the current
that's
environment.
Honestly, that's higher than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. So he considers that kind of like the addressable audience for publishers, the sort of people publishers should be trying to reach. When he gives that statistic, he's not talking about, for example, the people who might just buy one book a year and it's the Barbara Streisand memoir. That's not the avid reader we're talking about. We're talking about the people who are always probably reading a book. I think the really hard part is that when you start looking at the people who really, really, really care about books, which I would consider the audience for this podcast, who care about literature, who care about funding for the arts, who probably care about independent bookstores, who care about the culture outside of these big commercial spaces or big tech, then you get into an area that I sometimes call prestige content. And this also includes long-form journalism, so like The New Yorker or The Atlantic. This includes the New York Review of Books, prestige content, and the audience for that, I would just be guessing, but it's a small fraction of that 20%. And that's what the literary author who's putting out a new novel, it's what you would be dealing with. And this is where you get into sales figures where if the book sold 3,000 or 5,000 copies, it's considered a success. It's really hard to sell those books today. And I'm not sure that that's going to ever turn around. And I don't have a way to explain it. But here's an example. Just recently, within the last couple of weeks, Tin House Books was sold to Zando, it's not an old publisher. They were only started in 2020, but I would consider them a fairly commercial publisher. So, they publish all of the commercial genres, but they also have some imprints like The Atlantic and some others that would be more, not as commercial. Anyway, so Tin House, the literary journal, that hasn't been around for some years now. So what we have left is the books and then the workshop. So Zando took the book line. The workshop will continue under different leadership, probably the people who still are currently running it. So my guess is that Zando got Tin House Books for little to nothing, because I think Tin House is probably losing money. The frank truth is that many literary publishers, independent publishers outside the big New York houses, they barely break even, if that. And the ones that are doing better usually have some sort of backlist book or some author who is a consistent seller for them. So Tin House, classic prestige publisher. And so it's,
I love Tin House.
Yes, I would imagine
they publish.
you would.
I love their list. They publish great books.
Yes, exactly. So the fact that they can't survive, I mean, that's I'm just, as a business person here, I'm interpreting what has happened. I don't know what's happened, but I'm pretty confident they're not a profitable operation or a sustainable one, just because I know what the average book sales are for the sort of book they publish. So what does that tell you? Just that the audience for prestige content like that is very small, and that the people who want it, they have to support it, of course, any way they can, because it's not going to have the commercial support. It's unfortunately not going to be getting government support in this country, I don't think. Yeah, and I know that's not, I don't have any optimistic spin on this. If I have anything reassuring to say, it's that I think this dynamic has always been in play to some extent. So I remember, this is going back to the keynote talk I gave where I was asked to kind of research author incomes. I found this German manifesto that was written as literacy was growing and bookstores started to open and start selling books. And this German poet wrote a manifesto complaining that the bookstore was not stocking his collection of poems. Instead, they were selling ghost stories and romances. And, because his work didn't sell well, that was the mark of a great artist. And it's like, oh, the starving artist myth goes all the way back to this German poet.
Yeah. Spring's eternal. I mean, it's been around a long time. And I think for people listening who might be at the beginning of their career or at some point in their career where they want to try to ramp things up or make changes that will be beneficial to them, I want to give them some practical things that they can do. You write about this in your book about trying to look out at the marketplace and find 2 or 3 established writers or creators who are doing work similar to your own. Mm-hmm. That's a good place to start. Yes. Are there people who are in my ballpark who are having success? Yeah. And just see who they are and what they're doing, right?
Yeah, that's right. I should preface this by saying there are so many authors who offer not the greatest business examples. So you always have to be a little bit cautious. But and by that I mean sometimes you'll find really prominent authors who do really well, who have 0 website, online presence, nada. And it's because they just don't need it or they don't care. That doesn't play a role in how they sustain their career. So Jonathan Franzen would be the biggest example I can think of.
But that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate flex. I always say that's the biggest flex, where you're I don't even need a website.
Right. Right.
I'm getting huge advances and my books sell, and I'm I don't have to come play with the proletariat.
Exactly right. So keep that in mind when you do this sort of exercise. Please do not choose Jonathan Franzen as your model. So a better example in his space, I think, would be Monica Byrne. Her last name is spelled Byrne. And I happened to end up following her career a little bit by happenstance. So when I was at the Virginia Quarterly Review, this has been 13 years ago, we did a series on feminism, and I did a call for submissions, and she submitted an essay. And it was just on the precipice of her having her first novel release. And that novel did really well critically. It got all the reviews that you would want. I think she even had a TED Talk somehow in there. And just you couldn't, in my mind, you couldn't hope for better for your debut novel. But I also know it was literary and the sales were not, going to be that significant that she could live on it. I've never talked to her about this. I should. But at the same time, all of this was going on. She launched a Patreon, which at that time, I don't think it wasn't something that I saw writers typically doing. It was more for like maybe artists or musicians. But she launched this, and it's still going to this day. And she uses it to support her writing the same type of novel that she debuted with. And she says, right at the top, you are helping support my art because the market doesn't. And I think last time I checked, she was somewhere between $3,000 to $4,000 a month. Now I'm not saying that's like a luxury living by any means. It's barely sustainable, but I imagine she has, I hope, some other forms of income aside from the Patreon, but that would make a huge difference, I think, in any writer's life. And so writers, like as I explain in the book, look for those sorts of models and also understand that you have to be comfortable putting yourself out there and asking for what you want. I think a lot of writers are very shy or modest, or they feel like, I don't know, it could be a sign of failure, or they're not comfortable putting out what it is they're trying to do and what they want. And I think that's more or less imperative if you're looking to earn a living from this.
I would add just one caveat to that, because I'm sort of in that camp. It's like, I feel like join my Patreon. I die a little bit every time I say that on this show. And so I think like it's one thing to be somebody who's like so reserved that saying it even once is just out of the question or is just excruciating. I think most of us can say it once, maybe even twice. The problem is that you have to keep saying it. It seems like you have to just keep going out, and after a while you're like, okay, fuck it, I'm not going to have like a gigantic Patreon, because I get it. Like I get how it would be annoying to hear about this, but I guess some people just are shameless about it and people forgive them. I don't know how it works, but I have a hard time with it.
I think I don't know if this is true of you, but I think some people imagine a hard sell each time, which is certainly not what I'm suggesting. And I think there are ways to do it that are more engaging than just saying, join the Patreon. So, often what I see some successful folks do, or I should say creative, both creative and successful, is whatever activity is going on there behind the scenes, or whatever members, patrons are doing, finding little pieces of content or writing or something that, like this gem of interaction that is really delightful for them or you, preferably both, and you share that. Oh, did you know that last week on the in my member community someone shared da 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 da, and and so it shows that there is something desirable happening over here. Now, of course, that assumes that there's some engagement happening in that community, and not all patronage attempts are going to have that level of engagement. But anytime you can bring that in, I think it's very useful. And by that, if I just pull back, what I'm advocating for is an outward focus. So you don't have to think about it in terms of, I need to promote this thing, but think about, how does this bring enjoyment or delight? How could it be seen as a service to my community and what they're going to gain from the interaction?
Yeah. I mean, I think like this is a really good point to make. And it's something that I think a lot of individual creative people, be they a writer, like any kind of person who's making stuff and trying to get it out into the world and trying to make some kind of living from it, is that the project can be very me-centric. Because like a lot of times creative work is very interior to begin with, right? You're sort of mining your own depths and you're creating this thing, and then it's your name on it and it's going out into the world and people are responding to it, good, bad, or ugly, whatever it is. And so it necessarily feels like really personal. I think there's maybe too little focus placed on the audience. Like looking at what does the audience want? Like I like to joke, I started doing these Craftwork conversations like the one we're having now, like not too long ago. And the audience response was huge. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, well, it only took me, almost 15 years to figure out that my audience is like, yeah, teach, make it about me. like I have all these people on and, you know, the author interviews do great too, but it's like, there's a big audience out there for people who are like, yeah, help me.
Yeah.
I need help with my creative life and I want to become an author. And, you know, so I think that sometimes we can get too self-focused. And if we pay attention to audience behavior, like, you know, we talked about looking at writers who do similar work to ourselves and kind of paying attention to how they handle themselves online and elsewhere. But it's also paying attention to where the audience is and what are they reading? What kind of newsletters and podcasts are really gaining traction with people who are in this demographic that I'm trying to reach? And kind of putting on your business hat, you know, and doing a little bit of market research yourself and maybe just like looking at it from the other perspective, like the end user, if we're going to get techie about it.
Right.
Like,
yes.
What is their experience? What are they hungry for? How can I help them? Like, how can I be helpful? How can I be of service to my audience? And how can I delight them?
I think this should be an encouraging message for writers or idea that I think what writers excel at, especially in our current environment, is this feeling that writers deliver meaning, something that's authentic, something that's important to our lives, uncovering truths. And I think we're all hungering for more authentic interactions and community. We want to get away from some of these places that we now associate with distrust and turmoil in the world, Facebook, Twitter, and go into more private spaces. And I think writers are really well positioned to take advantage of that. The other thing I would add, which is kind of like in contradiction to what you just said, like a strategy that's in contradiction or a tactic, is sometimes it's just being open to the fact that some people want to support you in a bigger way and they don't need to get something in return. I'll use myself as an example. I've had a paid newsletter for 10 years now, and it's always been what I consider on the more affordable side. So it started at like $59 a year, which is a pretty, like if you're doing a Substack, that's a pretty average. I'm not on Substack, but that's a very average amount. It's gone up to $79 now over the last 10 years. But it's really just that one price point. Either you're in or you're out. And years ago, someone mentioned to me, you know, you should charge more. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not charging more. Like, writers don't have money to spend on this. I appreciate that. I'm not going to make it harder than it already is to get this information. But I think what I didn't consider is there can be like another level of support there for people who want to give me more, who know that this is going to help me spend more time writing and reporting and doing the things that I like to do. So when I recently relaunched this in like just last month, and I created that third tier. Well, there's now a free tier. There's my usual paid tier. And now there's what I call the supporter tier, and it's $200. And I was really curious to see how long will it take? Will anyone even pay this? And within 2 days of opening it up, I had 2 people at the 200 level. Now, there was some internal resistance to this, just because I'm like, don't want to take people's money and not deliver them something in return that's equivalent, because it's really just, hey, want to give me more money? Click here. People are willing to do it. Now, I'm in a unique position in that I've been doing this a long time. I've built up a lot of trust. But someone like you and other people who've been in the community a long time, practicing all sorts of forms of literary citizenship that have been immensely valuable, you can't even put a price on this. And I think there are many people who want to support that.
One would hope, right?
I hope.
And I want to talk to you. You mentioned in your book this, what is it? Is a marketing tool called SparkToro?
Yes.
What is that?
SparkToro is what I would consider a shortcut, like a rocket ship for figuring out where your audience is online, the demographics, and kind of the secret sauce to whomever it is that you think might be the target for your book, or the media or the influencers you need to target for your book. So for instance, if you were trying to figure out, I'm really trying to uncover a new audience for my podcast, or I'm trying to uncover maybe new advertisers or sponsors. Where should I be looking? What rocks should I lift up? SparkToro would tell you. So it's just
is it a paid service? It's like you have to pay for it?
You do have to pay. It's pretty reasonable in cost. I think you get a few searches for free, but it's not like the full search results that you would get. So I find that it's a user-friendly tool. I want to emphasize that because there are a lot of consumer research tools out there that I think are for people who have bachelor's degrees in marketing and consumer research. This is not that sort of tool. It's something anyone can use.
And then there's this acronym, ADA, Attention, Interest, Desire, Action, which I think are you pulling this from Glengarry Glen Ross?
I am.
That's
right.
Okay. But I mean, if we're going to get Glengarry Glen Ross about it, like you are a writer, you've looked out at 2 or 3 other established writers and creators who are kind of in the same space that you are, and they're having success. You're looking at where writers of your ilk are maybe appearing in the online media sphere in particular, like newsletters, podcasts, etc. And you're also kind of thinking of your own consumer behavior, because most writers are sort of in the same demo as the consumers they're trying to reach, right? We're all sort of the same tribe. So it's good to sort of look inward as well and think about like, well, what are the sites that I'm reading and what's the kind of content that I'm looking for? And then it's about trying to kind of go out and make contact. And I think this is where the Glengarry Glen Ross always be closing mentality comes into effect.
Well, I love this scene for this kind of conversation because, on one side of the chalkboard, he has ABC always be closing. And I say that is always overemphasized. And this is what people think about when they think about business and marketing. They think about that horrible ABC always be closing. And so I try to redirect people to the other side of the chalkboard, which is the AIDA, as the representation of a funnel. So in marketing speak, you hear about funnels, which is there's the top of the funnel, which is very wide. And this also kind of goes hand in hand with the demand curve we talked about earlier. So you've got the top of the funnel, which is where people are most likely to find you for the first time. For your podcast, maybe it's through searching podcasts, I don't know, or looking for an author they love and finding out they appeared on your podcast. I'm curious, are there specific authors who it's your interview with them that brings you a lot of new people?
I mean, yeah, there are certain interviews that are like the Karl Ove Knausgaard interview, just as one example, got a ton of listens, and I think maybe broadened the show's reach globally just because he's international. But it's honestly, it's largely a mystery to me too, because I don't hear, people don't write to me to be like, hey, this is how I found you. I just see the numbers, and I would love to know more, so if you're out there and you're listening, feel free to write me and tell me how you found the show. I'd be curious.
So this is what we're talking about is really knowing the funnel, knowing how this happens. And it is insanely informative for deciding how to spend your time and avoid wasted time. So if you understand how people find you, where they find you, and you can even, once you get advanced at this, you can measure it. You can really put numbers on how people are finding you in these ways. And then how often do they ultimately reach that 1,000 true fan status? Do people who find that particular interview you did, do they end up becoming devoted listeners and then supporting you at a certain dollar amount? Then you would want to try and do, like, a really good marketer would try and capitalize on that interview further, have a transcript, publish a transcript, have some small outtakes and put them on YouTube, or have some quote cards that you put on social media, and just like really wring out the sponge there on how much value you can get out of something that gives you a really valuable listener and supporter in the long run. So for me, I've already mentioned actually where the widest part of my funnel is. It's Google search. So, over more than a decade now, I've been refining what I offer at my site to capture those people At the moment, they have high interest in accomplishing something related to the publishing industry. And I try to get them on an email newsletter list, and then eventually a paid class or the paid newsletter. But there's still, 70% of what I do, if not 80% of what I do is free. And that's all working to capture people. And only a small percent will convert, but I only need a small percent to convert. And I'm talking about all of this in very businessy terms. And I want to emphasize, I don't treat anyone in this funnel as an object. Like, I'm genuine in my desire to serve these people and give them good information, because there is so much bad information out there, and there are scams and there are predators. And I'm trying to catch people before they fall victim to some of these publishing scams or spend money that they don't have. But I do look at where are my efforts best directed, rather than, spinning my wheels doing something that's really not bringing me the sort of people I'm after.
So again, just to review, the acronym is AIDA, and it stands for attention, interest, desire, action.
Yeah.
And so this top of the funnel, which is Google search for you,
yeah,
that's the attention phase, right?
Right, exactly.
And then once they click through and they start reading your website, that's interest.
Yes.
And then desire is, I want to know more. I need to get this newsletter.
Right. And then they take the action. So in marketing, there's usually what we say is the call to action, the CTA. That's the acronym marketers use. And so, I find that writers in particular, they don't have CTAs. They don't have a call to action. Shy, modest, I don't want to ask those things we discussed. But, it doesn't have to be a hard sell, but you do need to make people aware of what you have, because most people are if they loved this thing that you did, they either want to be notified when you have more stuff that they're going to love, or they want to hear from you regularly if they really fell for you in whatever it was that you did. And this is where I like writers to really broaden their imagination about what is that thing that you did. I mean, it might be a book, but it could also be a social media post, an article you published, a podcast you appeared on, etc.
Well, this book of yours is really exhaustive in a good way. I mean, it's like, I feel like I was reading it and I was like, she did a lot of work. This must have been a huge undertaking for you.
Yes. It's the second edition of a book that was first released in 2018. And I ended up rewriting huge swaths of it because the industry, especially magazines and online media, have changed so much.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. Again, it's so fluid that you almost, with a book like this, you have to kind of revise it every few years just to make sure that it's still
right,
in the know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that we covered in this conversation about how writers can make a living, but there's a lot more in this book that people can read about. But I really appreciate the time. I've been a fan from afar of yours. I signed up. I'm a newsletter subscriber.
Thank you.
Have known of you, like the other Jane Friedman, or maybe the other Jane Friedman is the other Jane Friedman. But it's, I don't know. I recognize the work that you do in service of writers in this community, and I appreciate it. And I certainly appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with my audience.
Thank you, Brad. It's great to be on.
Okay, that was my conversation with Jane Friedman. Her book is called The Business of Being a Writer, the second edition of which is now available from the University of Chicago Press. An excellent Craftwork conversation with Jane Friedman about how to make a living as a writer. You can find Jane on the internet. Her website is janefriedman.com. Read her blog, check out her newsletters, sign up for Electric Speed and The Bottom Line. And of course, she is all over social media, Blue Sky, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. So one more time, the book is called The Business of Being a Writer. The website is janefriedman.com. She is an excellent resource if you are a writer or you are somebody who is interested in learning how the business of publishing works. Don't forget to subscribe to this program wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. Sign up for my free weekly newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. I will let you know about the latest episodes of this program. I also share a list of links to things that I have been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, sign up for my newsletter over at Substack. If you love this show, if you listen regularly, I hope you will support the show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this program going into the future. If you want to get an Other People t-shirt or a sweatshirt, or if you want to sign up for my book club, all of that stuff can be done over at the show's official website, otherppl.com. And check out my new company. It is called Deep Dive. It will be launching later this year, and the website is www.deepdive.audio. You can follow Deep Dive on Instagram and Blue Sky. If you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a favor, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Rate it, review it. It helps the show in the algorithm. It helps it find new listeners. All right, so coming up on Thursday, I will be back once again with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for yet another episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, in which Mira and I try to make sense of the pop culture universe. Mira is younger than I am. She's a millennial. She knows a lot about pop culture. I am old. I am a Gen Xer, and I'm a little bit out of touch. So she educates me, and we have a discussion about this stuff on a weekly basis. New episodes of Brad and Mira for the Culture drop on Thursdays. So stay tuned.